The announcement didn't come with a warning. No clearing of the throat, no tapping on a glass, no awkward smile meant to soften the blow. It came right in the middle of the reunion prayer. We were all standing in a loose circle on the grass behind my grandmother's farmhouse, hands half joined, half awkward, when Uncle Ray let go of my cousin's hand and said it. "I'll keep this short," he said loudly, cutting straight through the pastor's gentle voice. "I'm selling Mom's farm today. Got an offer for $1.6 million. Papers are already drafted." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him, because no one says something like that. Not like that. Not here. The wind rustled through the old oak trees lining the fence, the same trees my grandmother planted the year my mother was born. A fly buzzed near the lemonade table. Somewhere a child laughed. Life kept moving, but inside me, everything stopped. The pastor froze mid-sentence. My aunt gasped softly. My grandmother's hand slipped from mine. She didn't speak. She just stared at my uncle like he'd switched languages mid-conversation. "Raymond?" she said finally, her voice thin. "What are you talking about?" Uncle Ray straightened, the way he always did when he wanted to look important. He wore a pressed button-down shirt that didn't belong anywhere near dirt, and sunglasses he'd kept on even during the prayer. "I'm talking about reality, Mom," he said. "This place is worth real money now. Developers are circling. I'd be stupid not to act." I felt my chest tighten. This farm wasn't just land. It was mornings that smelled like hay and coffee. It was barefoot summers and scraped knees. It was my grandmother humming while she hung laundry, the sound drifting across acres of open sky. And he was talking about it like it was a stock option. "You can't sell it," my cousin Mariah said, stepping forward. "It's Grandma's." Uncle Ray smiled at her. Not kindly, not gently, the way you smile at someone you think is naive. "I can, and I am." My grandmother swayed slightly. I caught her elbow before she could lose her balance. "Sit, please," I whispered. She nodded, still staring at him, and let me guide her to one of the folding chairs. Her hands were shaking. I could feel them through the thin cotton of her sleeve. "I don't understand. Your father built this house. We raised you here." Uncle Ray sighed, like she was exhausting him. "And you did a great job, but times change. I have the legal authority, power of attorney, remember?" That word landed like a slap. Power of attorney. He'd convinced her to sign it after her stroke 2 years ago, told her it was just in case, told all of us it was temporary. I remember standing in this very yard afterward, telling my mother I didn't trust it. "He wouldn't do that. He's family," my mom had said. I looked around now. My mother's face had gone pale. My aunt was crying openly. No one else spoke. Uncle Ray adjusted his watch. He wanted to tell you all together, figured it was better than rumors. "You chose a reunion." My voice surprised me. I hadn't meant to speak, but once the words were out, they kept coming. "You chose a family reunion on her land to tell her you're taking it away." He turned toward me, annoyed now. "And you are?" I met his gaze. "Her granddaughter," I said. "The one who stayed here every summer. The one who helped her bathe after the stroke when you were too busy." The air felt heavier. Uncle Ray's jaw tightened. "This isn't emotional. It's business." My grandmother looked up at him then. "I asked you one thing," she said softly. "One thing, that this land stays in the family." "And I tried," he snapped, "but no one else stepped up. No one else wanted the responsibility." "That's not true," I said. He laughed. Actually laughed. "With what money?" he asked. You think you can outbid developers?" "I think you never asked," I said. The pastor quietly excused himself. Plates of food sat untouched on the tables. Conversations that had been warm minutes ago had died mid-breath. Uncle Ray pulled a folder from under his arm. "Like I said," he continued, opening it, "the buyer is here. He's waiting. If Mom signs today, it's done, clean and fast." My grandmother stared at the folder like it might bite her. "I'm not signing anything," she said. Uncle Ray's expression hardened. "You don't have to," he said. "I can sign on your behalf." That's when I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, clarity. I looked at my grandmother, really looked at her, at the lines carved deep by decades of work, at the woman who had never asked for much, who had given everything she had to this family. And I realized something terrifying. He hadn't come to ask, he'd come to execute. "Who's the buyer?" I asked. Uncle Ray hesitated for half a second, barely noticeable. "A development group out of the city. They want the land cleared within 60 days. Cleared, as if the house was clutter, as if the barn where my grandfather carved my name into the beam was debris. I crouched in front of my grandmother, taking her hands. "Did you agree to this?" I asked gently. She shook her head. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "No, I thought he was helping me." That was it. I stood up. "You're not selling anything today," I said. Uncle Ray scoffed. "You don't have a say." I smiled then, not because I was calm, because I was done being quiet. "Actually," I said, "you might want to slow down." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because power of attorney doesn't mean what you think it means. And because I made a phone call this morning." His smile flickered. Just for a moment. And in that moment, I knew something he didn't. This wasn't going to end the way he planned. Uncle Ray laughed when I said I'd made a phone call. Not a nervous laugh, not a curious one. The kind of laugh men use when they think they've already won. "You?" he said, shaking his head. "You made a phone call?" I didn't answer him right away. I was watching my grandmother instead. She was staring at her hands again, rubbing her thumb over the thin gold band she'd worn for nearly 60 years, the same ring my grandfather slipped on her finger under that old oak tree by the fence, long before the land was worth anything to anyone but us. "Mom," Uncle Ray said, softer now, almost coaxing, "you don't need to stress yourself out. This is handled. You'll be comfortable. You won't have to worry about upkeep, taxes, repairs. I'm taking care of you." She looked up at him. "You're selling my memories," she said. Something ugly flashed across his face. "Memories don't pay bills," he replied. That's when my mother finally found her voice. "You're not even giving us time," she said. "You didn't ask. You didn't talk to us." Uncle Ray turned to her sharply. "Because talking leads to arguments, and arguments waste time." I took a step closer to him. "You mean they create witnesses?" His jaw tightened again. "Careful," he said. "You're treading into things you don't understand." I tilted my head slightly. "I understand enough." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a black SUV crunched slowly down the gravel drive, tires popping softly over stones that had been there longer than any of us. Every head turned. The vehicle stopped near the barn. A man stepped out, mid-40s, crisp blazer, phone already in hand, like this was just another appointment wedged between meetings. The buyer. Uncle Ray's posture changed instantly, straighter, polished. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen all day. "Gentlemen," he said, waving the man over. "Perfect timing." The buyer walked towards us, eyes scanning the land like he was already dividing it in his head. "Beautiful property. Prime location. You're sitting on a gold mine." My grandmother flinched at the word. "Mrs. Carter?" the man asked, extending his hand toward her. She didn't take it. "I didn't invite you," she said quietly. The man hesitated, glanced at Uncle Ray. "It's all right," Uncle Ray said smoothly. "She's just overwhelmed." I stepped between them. "She's not overwhelmed. She's saying no." The buyer frowned slightly. "Mr. Carter assured us everything was in order."
I'm sure he did, but you might want to sit tight before anyone signs anything. Uncle Ray's patience snapped. That's enough, he said sharply. You're causing a scene. No, I said. You caused it. I'm just standing in it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look at it right away.
Instead, I reached for my grandmother's hand again. "Do you trust me?" I asked her quietly. She nodded without hesitation. That mattered. I turned back to Uncle Ray. "You filed the power of attorney 2 years ago," I said. "You used the general form, not the durable one." His eyes narrowed. "So?" "So," I continued, "it automatically becomes void if the principal is deemed mentally competent and disputes the agent's actions." The buyer shifted uncomfortably. "That's not how I understood it," Uncle Ray said, though his voice wasn't as confident now. "It is," I replied, "and here's the fun part. Grandma was evaluated last month." Silence spread across the yard. My mother stared at me. "Evaluated?" I nodded. "By her primary care physician and a neurologist." My grandmother looked up at me, surprised. "You went to those appointments with me," she said slowly. "Yes," I said, "and you passed with flying colors." Uncle Ray's face drained just a shade of color. "That doesn't change ownership," he snapped. "You're right," I said calmly, "but it does change authority. You don't get to override her wishes just because it's convenient." The buyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we should—" Uncle Ray raised a hand, cutting him off. "She's bluffing," he said. "You think one doctor's visit undoes years of planning?" I finally pulled my phone from my pocket. "I think the county clerk's office might disagree, especially since I also discovered something interesting while making that call." His eyes flicked to the phone. "What call?" he demanded. "The one about the lien," I said. That word did it. "What lien?" my aunt asked sharply. Uncle Ray's mouth opened, closed. I looked around at the family, at faces that had trusted him without question. "Did you tell them?" I asked him. He said nothing. "The farm was used as collateral 3 years ago," I continued. My mother gasped. "For what?" "For a business loan, one that went bad." The buyer stiffened. "That wasn't disclosed." Uncle Ray finally exploded. "That was temporary," he shouted, "and it's under control." "It's not," I said. "The lien is still active, which means this property can't legally be sold without full disclosure and clearance." The buyer took a step back. "We need to pause this." Uncle Ray rounded on me. "You had no right to dig into my finances." "I had every right to protect her home," I said evenly. My grandmother squeezed my hand. "You risked my land," she said to him, "without telling me." His face twisted. "I was trying to save us." "No," she said. "You were trying to save yourself." The words hit harder than any yelling could have. The buyer backed away slowly. "Mr. Carter will be in touch once this is resolved." Uncle Ray watched the man retreat, panic starting to crack through his anger. "This isn't over," he said, pointing at me. "You think you've won something today?" I met his gaze without blinking. "I think you underestimated who was paying attention." He stormed off toward his car, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows of the farmhouse. When the dust settled, no one spoke for a long moment. The reunion was gone, the food cold, the day forever altered. My grandmother looked up at me. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly. "Yes," I replied, "I did." She smiled then, small, grateful, tired. And as I looked out over the land, the barns, the trees bending gently in the breeze, I knew something else too. Uncle Ray wasn't finished, and neither was I. Uncle Ray didn't come back after that, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to collect the casserole dish he'd brought and left untouched on the table. He drove away like a man who still believed the ground would settle back under his feet if he just left fast enough. It didn't. The rest of the reunion dissolved quietly.
No dramatic exits, no shouting matches, just people drifting away in small groups, voices low, eyes avoiding one another. The farm felt different once the cars were gone. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I helped my grandmother inside. She moved slowly, leaning more heavily on her cane than usual, the weight of the day pressing into her bones. I settled her into her favorite chair by the window, the one that faced the fields, the same fields she used to watch every evening with my grandfather, counting the cattle until the sun dipped low enough to turn the grass gold. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. "I keep thinking," she said, "that if your grandfather were still here, Ray wouldn't have dared." I didn't say what we both knew. He dared because Grandpa wasn't, and because Ray had spent his whole life believing he was entitled to more than the rest of us. My mother hovered in the doorway, arms crossed tight against her chest. "He used the farm as collateral? How did we not know?" she asked quietly. "Because he never wanted you to, and because we trusted him." That truth sat heavy between us. Later that evening, after everyone else had gone and the house had settled into its familiar creaks and sighs, my grandmother asked me to bring her the old wooden box from the top shelf of the hall closet. I knew the one. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside were deeds, handwritten notes, yellowed receipts, and folded papers that smelled faintly of dust and lavender. My grandmother laid them out on the dining table carefully, smoothing each one as if it were fragile. "I should have paid more attention," she said. "After the stroke, everything felt foggy. Ray stepped in so fast, said he'd handle things." "You trusted your son," I said. "Yes, and that trust cost me peace." She picked up an envelope and slid it toward me. "Read this." It was dated 4 years ago, my grandfather's handwriting.
I felt my throat tighten as I unfolded it. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if Ray is handling the paperwork, I need you to be careful." I looked up sharply. "What is this?" My grandmother's eyes shimmered. "He wrote it after Ray asked questions about selling parts of the land, said it was just curiosity. Your grandfather didn't believe that." I kept reading. "This farm was never meant to be sold to strangers. It's meant to be protected. If Ray pushes, it won't be for family reasons." My hands shook. "Why didn't you show this to anyone?" I asked. She sighed. "Because I didn't want to believe it, and because confronting him felt like admitting I raised someone who could hurt us." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked unevenly. Memories pressed in from all sides. Ray teaching me how to ride a bike, Ray cheering too loudly at my school plays, Ray slipping $20 bills into my pocket when my parents said no. The version of him who'd stood in that yard today felt like a stranger. But strangers don't know where your weak spots are. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:30. Unknown number. I answered. "You embarrassed me," Uncle Ray said, skipping any greeting. "I stopped you," I replied. "There's a difference. You blindsided me in front of everyone." "I blindsided your mother," I said, "on her land." There was a pause. Then his voice dropped, colder. "You think this is over because you scared off one buyer?" "I think you're done acting alone," I said. He laughed softly. "You have no idea how much debt I'm in." There it was. Not remorse, not regret, fear. "That's not my problem," I said. "It is if you want to keep the farm," he shot back. "The lien isn't going away, and if I default, they can force a sale." I sat up. "Only if the property is still tied to your loan," I said, "which it won't be for long." "What does that mean?" he asked sharply. "It means we're restructuring, and you're stepping away." "You can't cut me out," he said. "I'm family." "So is she," I replied,
and you forgot that." He hung up on me. By noon, I was sitting across from an attorney in town, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. She'd already reviewed the documents I'd emailed her overnight. "Your uncle's power of attorney is shaky, and his use of the property as collateral without informed consent is problematic. Can the farm be protected?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, but it will require moving ownership into a trust, one your grandmother controls, and it will require confronting your uncle legally." I exhaled. "He won't like that." She smiled thinly. "People rarely like consequences." That evening, I sat with my grandmother again, explaining everything: the trust, the legal steps, the confrontation that would come. She listened without interrupting.
When I finished, she nodded once. "Do it," she said. "I'm tired of being afraid in my own home." As I stepped back outside, the sun was setting over the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The land looked the same as it always had, but something underneath had shifted. Uncle Ray thought today was the end of a bad surprise. He had no idea it was only the beginning. Uncle Ray showed up 3 days later. No call, no warning, just his truck rumbling up the gravel drive like he still belonged here. I was in the kitchen with my grandmother, helping her shell peas at the cable the way she liked, slow and methodical, when the sound reached us. Her hands stilled. She didn't look up, but I saw her shoulders tense. "You don't have to see him," I said. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I do." By the time he knocked, she was already standing. He didn't wait for an answer. He opened the door like he always had. Confidence first, courtesy never. He looked tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired people use to get sympathy, but the hollowed-out kind that comes from nights without sleep and problems that won't stay quiet. "So," he said, scanning the room, "you've been busy." I didn't offer him a seat. "You shouldn't be here," I said. He ignored me and turned to my grandmother. "Mom?" She met his eyes steadily. "Sit," she said. That alone seemed to throw him. He hesitated, then sat at the table, folding his hands together like he was bracing himself. "I spoke to my lawyer," he said. "You don't get to just erase me." "No one is erasing you," my grandmother replied. "You did that yourself." His jaw tightened. "I made mistakes, I admit that, but selling the farm fixes everything." "It fixes you," she said, "not us." He leaned forward. "Do you know what happens if I default? They'll come anyway. Sheriff's notices, forced sale. At least this way, you walk away with dignity." She laughed then, a small, incredulous sound. "You think dignity comes from taking something that was never yours to give?" she asked. He turned to me. "You filled her head with legal nonsense." "No," I said. "You just don't like hearing it." He slammed his hand on the table. "I built my life assuming this land was my safety net." "There it is," my grandmother said softly. "Assuming." The word hit him harder than shouting would have. "You never asked," she continued. "You never said, 'Mom, I'm struggling.' You just took." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he exhaled, shoulders slumping. "I'm deeper than you think," he admitted. "The business failed, twice. I kept borrowing, thinking I could fix it. I thought if I could just sell the land, I could clean it all up. And leave nothing behind," I said. He looked at me sharply. "You don't understand what it's like to feel like a failure. I understand exactly. I just chose not to destroy someone else to avoid it." His eyes flicked away. "You've already moved things," he said. "The bank called me." "Yes," I said. "The lien is being negotiated. Without you." "You can't shut me out of my own family," he snapped. My grandmother stood then. Not quickly, not dramatically, but firmly. "You shut yourself out when you forgot who this farm was for," she said. "And now you will step back." He stared at her, disbelief warring with anger. "You'd choose her over me?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing what's right," she said. "You're my son. I love you, but love doesn't mean surrender." That was when he broke. Not loudly, not explosively. His face crumpled, and for the first time I saw the boy behind the entitlement, the one who had always needed more approval than he'd ever admit. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he whispered. "I know," she said, "but it did." He wiped his face roughly, standing. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "you sign a release relinquishing control. The trust goes into effect, the farm stays protected, and you start dealing with your debts without dragging her into them." "And if I don't?" I met his gaze. "Then the courts will decide, and it won't be kind." He looked around the room one last time, at the cabinets my grandfather built, the floor he'd run across as a child, the windows that still rattled in the wind. "I never thought you'd turn against me," he said to my grandmother. "I didn't," she replied. "You turned away first." He left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. Afterward, my grandmother sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I poured her tea and watched her hands tremble again, just a little. "You did well," she said to me. "I just stood my ground," I replied. She smiled faintly. "That's harder than it sounds." The paperwork was signed 2 days later. Uncle Ray didn't argue. He barely spoke. The trust was finalized by the end of the week. The farm was legally sealed, protected from sale, insulated from outside debt. When the attorney handed my grandmother the final documents, she held them like they were something alive. "I thought I was going to lose this place," she whispered. "You didn't," I said. "But I almost lost my son," she replied. That night I walked the perimeter of the property alone, the fence line, the old barn, the oak tree where my grandparents once danced barefoot under the stars. The land was safe, but the family? That was fractured in ways paperwork couldn't fix. I knew Uncle Ray wouldn't disappear quietly. Pride like his doesn't fade, it calcifies. And as the wind moved through the fields, carrying the familiar scent of earth and grass, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't over. The hardest part was still coming. Uncle Ray didn't fight the trust. That surprised everyone. No lawsuits, no dramatic threats, no last-minute attempts to claw his way back in. For weeks after he signed the release, there was nothing but silence. At first, I mistook it for peace. I was wrong. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning, ordinary enough to feel harmless. I was in the kitchen with my grandmother, helping her butter toast, when the phone rang. She answered it, listened for less than 10 seconds, then slowly lowered the receiver back into its cradle. Her face had gone pale. "What is it?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes glossy but steady. "Ray's house is gone," she said. "Foreclosed." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. I felt something twist in my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, grief. Not just for him, but for the version of him that might have existed if he'd chosen honesty sooner. "Is he okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly, alive, angry, ashamed. She paused. "He asked if he could come by." I didn't answer right away. This farm had survived generations of droughts, floods, sickness, and war. It could survive tension. What mattered now was what kind of woman my grandmother wanted to be at the end of her story. "That's your decision," I said finally. She thought for a long moment. "Tell him he can come, but not to stay." He arrived that afternoon. No truck this time, a borrowed sedan. He looked smaller stepping out of it, like the land itself had stripped something from him. His clothes were wrinkled, his confidence gone. He stood at the edge of the yard waiting. I didn't go to him. My grandmother did. They talked under the oak tree for a long time. I couldn't hear the words, only the tone. His broke once. Hers never did.
When it was over, she turned and walked back toward the house alone. He left without looking at me. That night, my grandmother slept more peacefully than she had in weeks. And something else shifted too. The farm felt lighter, as if it knew it had been chosen. The months that followed were quiet but purposeful. We repaired fences, repainted the barn, replanted the section of land Uncle Ray had neglected while he was busy leveraging it for his own survival. Neighbors started stopping by again, not out of curiosity, but out of comfort. The farm returned to being what it had always been meant to be, a place that held people together. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies blink against the dark, my grandmother reached for my hand. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Anything. When I'm gone," she continued, "will you stay?" The question caught me off guard. "Stay?" I repeated. "With the land," she said, "with this place. I don't want it passed around like an object again. I want someone who loves it." I swallowed. My life had been built elsewhere, a job, an apartment, a carefully constructed distance from the past. But as I looked out over the fields, the answer settled into me with surprising ease.
"Yes," I said. "I'll stay." She smiled then, not the tired smile she'd worn for years, a real one. "Good," she said. "Then I can rest." She passed 6 months later, quietly, in her sleep, in the house she'd loved more than anything. The funeral was small. Family, neighbors, a few old friends who remembered the land when it was just dirt and hope. Uncle Ray came. He stood at the back, eyes down, and left before the reception. We never spoke again. The farm stayed. Legally, spiritually, completely. I moved into the house full-time, took over the work, learned the rhythms my grandmother had known by heart. The land taught me patience. It demanded honesty. It rewarded care. And sometimes, when the wind moves just right through the oak trees, I swear I can hear her humming. Years later, people still ask why I fought so hard, why I didn't take the money and walk away. I tell them the truth. Because some things aren't assets, they're anchors. And once you understand that, no amount of money can convince you to let go.